I want that experience endlessly the whole time you're looking at my work. So duration matters in that way of how can I really capture and freeze the person in that time and sit with the moods that like may come up.
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. The Whitney Biennial is here. That would be the Whitney Museum's big curated show, which every 2 years brings together dozens of artists, always closely watched by critics and public as a statement about what is important now in art. Hot on its heels, next month, MoMA PS1 is staging Greater New York. That event happens every 5 years, bringing together dozens more artists to take the temperature of art in New York. Taína H. Cruz, my guest today, is featured in both of these shows at once. For the Whitney, she is even, in a way, the face of the show. A work by Cruz, a green-tinged close-up painting of a grinning child called I Saw the Future and It Smiled Back, is blown up on a billboard outside the museum in the meatpacking district. This is a lot of attention for an artist who is relatively young, born in 1998, and just getting her MFA from Yale's famous School of Painting last year. She's worked in a variety of media, but is known now for paintings, often featuring images of Black female figures with a woozy, moody, sometimes unsettled or unsettling atmosphere. Sometimes she works in suggestions of African American and Caribbean folklore, or intimations of horror and fantasy. Sometimes she's played on the images of celebrities like Halle Berry or Tyra Banks. Sometimes she reworks her own personal photos of neighbors in New York. Since Cruz is an artist that the curators of these big shows are looking to, I wanted to get a sense of the influences from art and otherwise that are shaping her approach to art and what she makes of all the attention. Taína, thank you for talking to me.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here.
Where are you right now?
I'm currently in New Haven, Connecticut.
So I wanted to talk to you, pick your brains, partly because I was going through the lists for the Whitney and Greater New York, and your name comes up in both. How does that happen?
Yeah, it feels really surreal that it happened simultaneously at the same time. I grew up with thinking the city as my playground, so to be included into these institutional big art spaces is very significant and intimate in its own way. It definitely wasn't something that I was strategizing towards or was thinking about. I had just finished grad school and the work was expanding in scale and atmosphere and just about how much space that I was taking up. So the work was already calling for a different kind of visibility, and it just so happened that timing and aligning worked out.
Do the curators know about each other, or is you're keeping it a secret from them?
Now that the announcements of the artist lists were posted, everyone just knows and has been talking. But when I first got the information over the summer, fall area, I definitely was able to keep the information to myself. So,
oh yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
And do you know what's going to be in both of the shows? I mean, can you give people who haven't or aren't going to be able to see the shows a hint of what you're showing?
Yeah. So for the Whitney, I am presenting a multi-part installation that has a site-specific wall drawing, paintings, an animation that I made, a bronze figurine on top of a stack of drawings and writings that I made in the studio. So there's a sense of storytelling and narrative particularly involved for that space. I was given this large curved wall and architecturally created something different than however type of ways that I've been displaying my work. So I was challenged with this architectural curved wall, and the work was responding to that.
They threw you a curveball or a curve wall.
It definitely did, but I love a good challenge. I was already thinking about curved portals in general, so it just seemed like everything that has happened so far just keeps working organically and naturally. So I was already thinking about a curved just exterior in general, and so now to show work on that makes so much sense.
Is that a development in what you've been doing? This kind of multi-layered mixed media installation is kind of scaling up, you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, it even goes back to in grad school for my thesis, the first time I made a painting that looks like it was coming out towards you. So it was definitely a mixture of like my sculpture background. I studied sculpture in undergrad, so I am constantly thinking about my work within a 3D space, how art can feel embodied sensorially. And I want my paintings to feel that same way. And so for my thesis, particularly for that installation, it was more so like, how can I create a painting that you can feel like you can delve into? And what better way to do that than to have a painting coming out towards you? So that calls for like a different way of showcasing my paintings. And I was still thinking about that for the Whitney installation specifically, different ways of just showing painting.
And Greater New York, is that still top secret? Or?
No, not top secret. For the Greater New York, my space is in a corner, and I'm going to be doing a large scale wall drawing within that corner. This one feels a lot more atmospheric, but a lot more architectural to the building of MoMA PS1 itself. So there is some specificity towards that as well. It's more so like, how can I make the image wrap around you? It's exciting because both of these shows are happening simultaneously and they feel so related, but also it's like behaving very differently. One is like gathering elements to create like a stage, a performance, a story, while the other one is more so dispersing into space and working across what keeps like lingering. It just depends on where the art is living at the moment.
But it's interesting to me. In both cases, it sounds like the curators kind of more picked you than works of art. They're actually inviting you to respond to the space in both cases.
I really like that you mentioned that because I mean, outside of me and the work itself, I think they're giving me these like opportunities for me to just like control or just have full on manipulation of the space given to me. Manipulation may not be the right word, but I have to submit proposals and project ideas. So it's not really like work that I've made in the past. It's all like what is currently I'm feeling and inhabiting at the current moment. And they're totally like willing for me to like let my ideas just like splurge all over the space. That's essentially me as an artist. I think like it's necessary for me to constantly create something that feels now and present. So I'm grateful that it's not like work I've made in the past and it's just done in that, but it's something that is actively moving and feels energetically towards something.
Well, let's talk about you. Maybe that'll give people a sense of the content of some of this new work. So you already said you're from New York originally. Tell me about your background.
Yeah, I grew up between Harlem and the Bronx. My mom lives in Morningside Heights near Columbia, and my dad is in the Bronx near the Bronx Zoo. He was born in El Barrio in Spanish Harlem, so New York really runs deep in my family through different generations and cultures. I went to school on the Upper West Side and school in Brooklyn Heights, and a lot of my after school activities really took me all over the city. So again, I think about the city as this like playground of discovery. I was in different neighborhoods. I was uptown, downtown, and I was constantly like thinking about the movement between these like different communities and the energies that was felt because each block held something so different. I was feeling all of that from child to when I went to college. And so I think like I'm still reliving those memories. I'm still feeling how sensorial and heightened that experience was. And I think the work is inspired by that.
You mentioned in an interview I read with you the punk goth scene as an influence.
Yeah, I feel like the punkish scene was also at a time where the internet was also creating spaces for community. So I found that there was community reflected on the internet, but then people were finding inspiration in the communities in New York. I was witnessing like this overlap of internet culture influencing also New York being two steps ahead of like what is the next trend or something in that way. New York is very gothic. It's very like solitude
Gotham
and
City.
it's yeah. And I think like that is just part of me to like really admire the nitty grittiness of the essence of what it means to be punk rock.
What was the first thing that inspired you to think about being an artist?
It's hard to like name a first moment because I feel like every little like strand was like braided from childhood up. I had a very active imagination. I was always playing pretend, inventing worlds, speaking to the stuffed animals. And, I felt really embodied by my imagination. It felt more like it was in my body and not just something outside of me. But then, like more literal, my mom gave me a portable dry erase board, something that like I would use all the time on subways or on the bus. And going back into the city, I see how much children need like stimulation while they're in these like public spaces, because in these public spaces there's people themselves like going to and from work, dealing with so much. My mom was like carrying myself and my younger sister around the city along with her to run errands, and she gave me a dry erase board, and that was kind of like my way of finding peace and sanctuary between like me feeling the energies of like all these other adults. And so I recognized that as like an early memory of like when I found art making to be a source of like, okay, this is peace, this is sanctuary, this is my survival of how I can navigate this bustling world.
It's interesting working in public, like as you are doing now, site responsive and in a way, mobile. You went to art school though. You went to MICA, yeah, the Maryland Institute College of Art, and studied sculpture, you said?
Yes, I think that was really like a transformative experience studying sculpture. It combined my interest in the digital and internet art within something that felt installation wise, creating environments. And so that was really a transformative experience, like recognize the type of art that I wanted to make. I did not always feel like I was so tied down to being labeled as like a sculptor or a painter or an illustrator. It was just like within the sculpture department, you were given a lot of concepts and theories to like help you amplify what you're searching for. And I think the sculpture department really allowed that to really flourish.
Were you a pandemic era student?
I graduated in 2020. So like when it was like kicking off.
Yeah, you graduated into the pandemic.
Yeah, so that was super strange. So my like last semester of undergrad was online, and did it shift anything? I don't know. I think like if anything,
I mean, how do you show your art to your peers in that situation? How did you?
Well, I was already working a lot with like creating 3D modeling videos and 3D animation. Right. So I was like a perfect opportunity to just like keep making video work even before like the pandemic happened. I think when I was studying sculpture, video and installation was front and center of like the work that I was interested in. So now that I have everyone's full divided attention on Zoom, everyone was able to like see like my videos and like have to feel something from the videos themselves. That was kind of like the work that I was doing. But also, I think like I was also interested in creating video games a lot more. I have a lot of like extensive background with just like playing with technology. So it just allowed me to make video games related to my videos. It was all just different ways of exploring.
Well, but then you went on to go to the Yale Painting and Printmaking department, which is a very famous department. A lot of very famous artists have come out of it. Kende Wiley and John Curran and Micheline Thomas. You have a multimedia background, but decided to go in for painting. Why?
When I was applying to grad school, I had a studio in Chicago, and I was just making a lot of paintings. Painting is something that feels natural to me as well as my video and sculpture work. And that's where I feel like I don't have like a hierarchy on what matters most to me, which medium matters most to me. And that's why right now I need to combine them all, both if it's necessary. But when I was applying to grad school, I was making a lot of paintings because I think painting is fun. And my portfolio had a lot more of the 2D drawings and paintings than like my sculpture. So it was simply like, this is the one moment I'm going to apply to grad school. Let me like take what I have, and it just fit the painting category.
I'm interested in what the mood is in art school right now. You're talking about how you have a background in multimedia stuff, doing video games and stuff. And I feel like a lot of image makers are really freaked out because of all the AI stuff and the way the digital world is. Is that a conversation that you're having in school or people are talking about in relationship to painting?
In a sense, I think the relationship that people are talking about painting, at least what I saw, was kind of like, are you abstract or are you figurative? And I was
really?
like,
old school.
Yeah,
old school. That's no. The answer is no.
So
they're not having a conversation. That conversation.
Yeah, I think like that wasn't really the forefront. And so I think I strategized my 2 years of grad school as like, okay, this is a container. During these 2 years, I'm just going to figure out the type of artist I want to be or that I already am. And of course, that is always going to be fluctuating. But I was able to like really garner those 2 years as like, I don't have to put my survival on the line, and that I had this freedom to experiment, to play with scale, to play with tone, to play with if I want to include a figure or an animal. And so I guess like within that discussion, the idea of the digital kind of was back end to me. I can go on forever about the internet and the digital sphere and what that means to me, but I was more interested in like what my paintings were already doing for people and how I can like really push them into thinking about it completely differently. And that's 2 years of studio space where I was just having fun and experimenting, I think really like solidified what time and pressure means to my work and what that means to others.
What sort of artists do you look to historically or contemporary peers you think are doing relevant work?
An artist that I look to historically always, I would say Francisco Goya. I think there's a type of like existential loneliness that doesn't feel performative. It's atmospheric. The feeling really sits in the space rather than being announced. And I think about that a lot, how tone can carry something, heavier than narrative.
Something I think about Goya is something I can see in your paintings, that he's an old master, but there's something always a little odd in his figuration.
Yeah, so odd. And I love that it's odd because it just shows that it's more real. I don't know. That's like, it really sits with me. It sits with me for a very, very long time. And I think he's that one artist that I'm always finding something new towards. And for the contemporary, I would say like I look towards like modding communities, like people who are taking apart devices and putting them back together. Yeah, I think like because I'm already coming from this background of art making as embodied, that I look towards like other references of embodiment. And I think like the modding community, the hackers that are still striving along, really like solidifies that these systems aren't fixed. And so I really admire just like going
like
back
physically hacking together machines.
Yeah,
what you're talking
physically
about?
and
like a maker community.
Yeah, maker community, but also like different scripts online that could like easily be not easily, but now that is like again with the internet, things have been constantly changing. But I feel like there is an essence of like going against this fixed idea of how we can use the internet and these devices, and they're still holding strong to a lot of what is being able to change today. So I really like to be reminded that there's other communities outside of this art world that are actively building apart, building something together and seeing what comes of it. And I think that's where discovery, as artists is really important to keep that mainframe alive.
Yeah, pre-Yale, you made some digital work. Like
Yeah.
you have the work that's it's a sort of a digital avatar of Halle Berry, I think. It walks you through a breathing exercise. It's sort of creepy, sort of sincere. What were you trying to get at with that?
I made that during undergrad. So again, like undergrad, I was really like, let me combine my love of computer science and the tech world and the glitch art, digital art community into like something that could feel like I could project that.
Kind of hacking together
absolutely.
stuff.
And so I was interested in spirituality always. My mom was a trained hypnotist and was a very religious person. I'm coming at these worlds, I would call them, from like a deeply religious perspective, a folklore perspective, but then also like a computer science, Lego robotics, kinetic machinery, like putting like motors and machines together to create like a sort of animated being. And all of that sometimes works well in the language of video. So I was inspired to just like create a 3D avatar of Halle Berry, kind of enacting like this influencer trope of can you achieve spirituality through a YouTube video? And it's fun to create something that is direct and straight to the point, that doesn't always have to like be blurred or layered or a little bit more advanced to get to a reaching point. I felt like sometimes, the video is doing what it's doing and we can leave it at that.
Your art now, even though it's not necessarily working with digital stuff has been shown in the context of digital stuff, like at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, in the Code Switch, Distributing Blackness, Reprogramming the Internet art show, right? They're showing your paintings in the context of a show about Black artists relating to data and art. How do those pieces fit together?
I think it fits together because I think it fits together.
Sure. But I suppose for the curator,
I think particularly, well, for that, it was wonderful.
You managed to convince someone, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, it's also like those paintings were also kind of like a collaboration between the curator Legacy. So Legacy Russell, I really enjoyed when I'm showing in these spaces that there is some sort of like connection beyond myself, the art. What else can we like pull from there? So like having like a coffee time with Legacy and we were discussing like where she's coming from and where I'm coming from. And it just like ended up having it being the right moment to create a painting to like really talk about this moment.
That makes a lot of sense because Legacy Russell wrote Glitch Feminism. She's also from New York, and she talks in that book exactly like you do about discovering the internet in a time in New York when it becomes a place where you're finding subculture and the city is changing. So there's a horror vibe. I mean, you talked about folklore and spirituality. I wouldn't say that the paintings read as digital, but they read as kind of images you're finding and processing, maybe out of like digital archives, perhaps, and then transforming. Is that how you work, more or less?
Not anymore. So again, that was kind of like pre-grad school, like right off the bat from pandemic vibes, and like still in pandemic vibes. And that was like a source of like processing for me.
You mean because everybody was online? It's like that's the only reference you could have?
I was always already online. Like if there was like a pandemic or not, I was like online. I grew up online. So for me, it was more so like, again, I was going back into like drawing and painting, and I found different images that I was still like interested in from like a teenager. And I would just think about why I was interested in those images and display it back to me. For example, like one of my paintings prior to grad school was like, again, thinking about these like caricatures. So I had Halle Berry. I thought about Tyra Banks. And so I formulated Tyra Banks as she was
Tyra
like,
in the middle from 2023?
Yeah. I depicted her in the Middle East, basically. I thought about my mom, single mom with 2 daughters. We were watching America's Next Top Model growing up. Different ways of like I was seeing and thinking about culture growing up just resurfaced. And so why not put this like another character in this like abnormal space and like see what kind of conversation goes from there. So like at that time, that was like my way of like thinking about digital art and physical paintings and ways at which they converge. But like now that's not how I work at all. So I feel like things have shifted in a way that I think has just been important.
So what are you shifting away from? Is it just a process of self-discovery, more discovering what you like through graduate school or through living, or is it trying to move away or towards something?
Oh, yeah, absolutely moving towards something. I feel like as much as I admire and was interested in what the grad school experience gave me, this is all like work that I have been like just taking in on my own time. And so it began with a lot more listening, listening in silence, spending time with silence. The internet is loud. Everywhere around us is loud. And so it allowed, I think, like if I wasn't listening to myself and what the work was like actively like speaking or saying, because if you sit long enough, if you sit straight at your work in the studio for 2 hours long or more, it just starts coming to you. And so I think I spent a lot of more time listening than like being still in silence. And then that has like really generated the work that I've been making today. That feels a little bit more different than starting off from the digital and going off from there.
I have not seen your work in person. I've only seen it digitally. So I'm going to get a big dose of Cruz, double dose of Cruz in this coming season. But the works I have seen features a lot of female or femme Black figures with a very unplaceable emotional tenor that sometimes verges towards the monstrous, I'd say. Is that still what you're exploring? Or are you moving towards a new thing with the new projects, or am I even reading those images correctly? I'm thinking of one where there's like a figure taking a selfie and she has like yellow teeth.
again, that was like when I was referencing more from this photo that I had of like someone taking a selfie in Harlem. And I incorporated a lot of like different elements to like amplify the expression a bit more. For that, it's hard to say where it comes from besides like my neighbors growing up or like otherworldly. I feel like I've already experienced like what otherworldly beings or creatures or humans look like just growing up in the city and being surrounded by anyone and everyone. And I held on to what that felt like. And so the work that I was making that was sort of depicting that emotion was like highlighting the people that I grew up with or that I felt like I grew up with, that you didn't really know too fully their story, but they were like right there in your face and you felt tingly or charged by that. And all those portraitures was just me recounting those moments of like, ding, something like this, like I'm interacting with this human that isn't like no longer a real human, but I just create like it feels fun to just go in and start like creating and working around with that tingling sensation.
I'll tell you how I naturally read them. Just looking at them is that there has been this big tradition of it's been very much at the center of art for the last 10 or more years of the Black figuration.
Mm.
That, you know, some of the artists who came out of Yale, like Wiley and Thomas, are major avatars of. And that's such a heroic and idiom, you know, like creating really attractive, almost like fashion-y figures.
Mm.
And then I look at these images that you're working with, and it really just seems to be resisting that, or it's looking at the image in a different kind of way. It's almost trying to draw out some kind of image, that energy in these figures or images it's almost hard to pin down. You know, they seem to be moving towards some sort of point of undefinability. Is this an attractive figure or a figure that I'm scared of or something like that?
I love that because that is true. I feel like, especially at school, there's always this like talk about figuration, and part of the work is just like, okay, like let's cancel out the noise and like what these like hierarchies are trying to like tell you. And it goes back to like what horror means to me. Horror is simply like a tool, a language that I use that feels right. I'm not trying to like brand the work with it. At the same time, it shows up because it's a way of holding tension. And I truly think like it's a good way of like tying in humor, beauty, the grotesque, honesty all together. And it lets me sit within that uncertainty because the unknown is scary. Everyone like can absolutely for sure feel like the uncertainty of like human existence is frightening. So I'm not really trying to like create these like jump scare, shock value experiences. It's really about the energy of like your body being alert, almost buzzing, it's almost tingling, a sense of haunting that isn't scary, but like when you finally are sitting down by yourself and you let your guard down after being human for 24/7, what is like starting to like come up and appear for you? And you can't help but to feel like a sense of unnervedness, but it's thrilling. It's a thrilling pathway to like figure out what we're doing here.
Like we're talking horror movies or just horror content, or
Not even horror movies. I don't really watch that many movies. Horror as in like the boiler room in the Bronx and how it's like steaming and it's hot and you're like trapped and you're like
the
wondering what's
feeling of
happening.
horror
Yeah, absolutely.
letting yourself feel the feeling of horror.
Absolutely. And there's different, and that's where I mean, like, there's different feelings of that. It's not always like a shock or in your face. It's something that lingers a little bit longer. And I liked that feeling of what is lingering even after dark.
There is some, I guess not horror elements, but fantasy elements in some of the paintings, like elf creatures or, you know, creaturely aspects of it. I know that connects to the folklore aspects that you're interested in from other things, right? So there's some supernatural stuff going on in there.
Absolutely. I think, again, the supernatural, it relates to my imagination of like what I was enjoying growing up. I felt like I was seeing fairies in Central Park and I was like seeing the goblins underneath the pot steaming hole. So I think it's for me, it's just like recapturing moments that I saw was like glimpsing past me and I wasn't really supposed to see, but then I happened to like, they slipped up or a character slipped up and I caught them in a way. So I think like it has been like a natural like language. It's everything I'm making has just been natural and not forced. And so sometimes it calls for a pointy eared or a wing that is kind of broken.
The people I know who are really into horror, movies, that is, which I do not get. Not my thing, but my friend was telling me, well, the thing is, you feel really in your body, you get snapped out of your head. And for this 2 hour period, you're just you're locked in because you're waiting for the bad thing to happen. I do think that that's very now. If I had to guess why the curators from these different shows sort of converged around you as one of the artists who they would both be interested in, it has to do with the way your works capture mood. The Whitney in their statement around this biennial says, rather than offering a definitive answer to life today, this Whitney biennial foregrounds mood and texture. And I do see a lot of artists coming up in this moment, moving away from meaning or trying to make a clear statement and really towards mood and texture. Do you feel that? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I do think again, with process, it is about mood for me, absolutely. And I really like that you mentioned the horror movie enjoyers would have those 2 hours of feeling that out of body. For me, is I want that experience endlessly the whole time you're looking at my work. So duration matters in that way of how can I really capture and freeze the person in that time and sit with the moods that may come up, or, when they go home and they have a dream and they would be like, oh, I remember exactly where I saw this from, or something like that. And mood really helps it. We're afraid of our emotions. And so I think even I am trying to, as an artist right now, I feel like I'm constantly embattling my own emotions. And so the work, it's speaking to beyond me, beyond meaning, beyond context. But at the same time, there is a lot of meaning. It's very specific. And
For sure. Well, there's a lot of meaning in mood. It's a meaning that is kind of at a right angle to words, or snaps you out of your head. In the case of that feeling that horror gives you, how do you feel about explaining your work? This is a pitfall of biennials. People are always complaining about the explanations of the text, and someone like you doing work that's leaning into feelings. How do you feel about words?
I've definitely have maintained my love of trying to find meaning while I'm trying to find how important it is to write about my work. I feel like my understanding of writing and art making was always within this theoretical lens of there has to be some type of academic language or a place in art history for your work to it feel aligned with. And maybe that was why I always had some kind of disconnect with writing. But then I learned that my work is calling for different modes of communicating that is beyond the visual. I'm a super visual person. So already I feel like when I'm making something, words are not always there to qualify what I want. But I learned that through making a play or writing a script about the works that is speaking together when a human is no longer present in the space. What are different ways of words and language that can speak to the art I'm making? But it's an ongoing process. I feel still to this day, my artist statement is not what I want it to be. It's going to be just an ongoing process.
A terribly challenging form of writing. I've taught artist statements before, and it's just, I know that it fries artist brains because, you're there to make visual objects.
And I feel I'm close. I'm inching towards, okay, maybe this language is doing something right, but then it flattens. I'm still just trying to figure something else out.
So that was the other thing I wanted to talk to you now that you mention it is medium. So you're doing a mixed media installation at the Whitney, and something I was looking through the artists in these shows and others upcoming, and just noticing how much with artists now, it's not exactly new, but I was really feeling it in these lists. It's nobody works in a medium. Their artist statement is never I am a painter. It's always I do everything. I work in writing and curating and the internet and performance. And I was almost thinking, we should just assume all artists basically do everything unless they state, I am focused on this. Why do you think that is?
Again, I just got out of grad school. You were fit into these categories, these labels, you're a painter, a sculptor. I was always against that. Same with these categories of if you're a painter, are you figurative, are you abstract? For me, it's just I'm an artist. I feel I make work and I would use any medium by any means necessary for me to get my point or feeling across, for me to create this experience. If it calls for a painting, I'll use a painting, or a video, I'll use it. For me, it's really about dismantling these hierarchies. I'm against these hierarchies of one medium can capture attention much more longer than the other one. So I feel like I'm like constantly trying to like play with what's given to me because right now it feels like this endless field because of this, the time we're in, we can have access to different mediums and work with them and have it ordered and delivered to us in our studio doorsteps. So then it's like, how can I challenge that easy accessibility that I'm already feeling like even more so? And that causes for spending time, a long time playing and really mushing the mediums together. I like to get really experimental, mad scientist because I did travel soccer growing up, and then I also did debate and Lego robotics competitions. For me, is like all of these things is already a part of me. I'm already this living embodiment of my parents putting me into like every kind of like after school activities. So then why not, if art is already embodied as well? I can't be tied down. I just can't.
Yeah. I think that's how a lot of people feel. And what I wonder about it is the idea of mastering a medium, like to mash them together well, don't you have to like get the rules of one or both?
Absolutely. And I think like that's why painting comes into a good forefront. These spaces still want to see paintings. And luckily, I've had a long time of figuring out light and shadow and figuring out how to do a figure or an animal and spending time working with what I know about painting, how to use oil paint. That just comes from like the territory of doing art growing up all my life. The one thing that I'm still like striving for is to figure out how I can make a sculpture that really feels not well funded. I feel like a lot of my work right now has been like a lot of things that I have the control ability to make. And like I was able to do it with the resources that I have. So like even like seeing work at the Beacon, that feels like a sense of, okay, this is maybe like one point in a way of mastering sculpture. But at the same time, that wasn't always like my direction of like entering sculpture, or I wasn't really so attuned to like sculpture as these clean cut lines. For me, it was more so like the Abigail DeVille or Pepon Osario who was making these installations of memories and that was maximalist or like had a sense of like vibrating history that I felt like I saw more within my family lineage and whatnot. So already like this, how could you, what I would say like this mastery of mediums, it comes from like, I have a long ways to go. I'm only 27. So I feel like I have the rest of my timeline to really figure out how much further I can push this medium and whatnot.
So yes, you are an emerging artist right now in this moment, and I'm sure that's a lot of pressure. I wonder how you're thinking about that pressure. Is there advice that anybody's giving you, these curators or dealers, about how to position yourself as this attention converges on you?
Honestly, no, there hasn't really been any advice that stuck with me. If anything, like it was exactly what someone would say, like I should apply to something, like it was like a residency or a grant before I no longer qualify as an emerging artist. And that kind of like freaked me out, or that confused me in a bit. Yeah, it confused me because like I hadn't really been thinking of myself in these categories, emerging, established, whatever comes after that. And I've been making work since I was young. So it always felt like this like continuous practice for me. So to then like be like, okay, well, there's going to be a certain cutoff for you to no longer get into this residency because you may not be emerging anymore. And I was like, that's freaky. And so I feel like for me, it made me aware of like how much an art world can categorize and organize people in these like timelines. And that itself is like the advice. Okay, people are really thinking about art in a totally different way that I am like processing my body as an artist. And how can I, it feels a little bit separate from the act of making itself.
So is there advice you would give to others then?
Yeah, I would definitely say like use discernment, follow instincts, know when it's time to leave the studio, protect your energy. You're in it for a long, long time. So gotta maintain the self.
Well, Taína, it's been great to talk to you. I'm really looking forward to actually seeing the work when these shows open.
Thank you so much, Ben.
The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili, with contributions from Kate Brown, Ben Davis, Caroline Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.